All right, looks like some folks are last second kind of logging in, getting ready to go. I'm excited about what we'll be presenting on today. It's a very relevant and important topic. And so as we move through the presentation, again, feel free to type your questions into chat. We'll get to as many of those as we can. Thanks so much for being here. I know it's busy. Things are getting back into the swing of business. And so this topic is really born out of a couple of things. One is the approach that we take to our clients and customers has revealed that this is a very consistent question. And then the other is as we go back into our environments and back to work, the ability to collaborate, to share, to stay connected, even when you're not physically, is more important than ever. And so we're going to be talking about how to effectively leverage OneDrive, Teams, and SharePoint together, and how that can basically improve your effectiveness as an organization. A lot of times, as we look at one specific app or what does one specific application, what does it do? What we wind up doing is picking one or the other based on like a feature or a benefit. And that is a very common approach. And each of these platforms in and of itself does not necessarily solve a bigger picture. We live really in an app-based world, right? So now organizations, instead of purchasing large systems that include a myriad of different modules or applications that they're never going to effectively leverage, you can actually now as a company choose what pieces you want to take and really just pay for that or pay for the training on those specific needs. But there is some confusion around how these three work together. So we'll be covering three of the most popular yet really misunderstood pieces of technology that can keep an organization, again, close even if they're not physically. So the next slide here, oh, there we go. Next slide here, it's a little bit about us, right? So I mentioned, the reason this presentation is happening, it was born out of a deep conversation which we had with a customer of ours. This challenge was definitely not isolated. So we decided to take this topic and make it available to people with the same question. So how we got into this discussion is right on the slide above. Our purpose is really to make technology work for you in your context. And so we take everything, whether it's your customer and vendor experience, productivity in general, decision-making, which could be things like analytics or data visualization. Really, we take it from the bottom up. And so this allows our customers to then ask, when should I be using what? Or how do I get the most out of this piece of technology? Or where are things going? Which is really technology-led innovation, right? And so we at Advaiya take pride in becoming an extension of our customers to guide them through what they have already, make recommendations for now, as well as in the future. And so that's really where this whole webinar came from, is really conversations with our customers. So what is our agenda? We're going to be doing a quick overview on Microsoft Office 365, collaboration within those apps, and then specifically the three, obviously in the title, OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams. Use cases, so when do I use what? How do these actually work together? And then really we're going to do a bit of a deep dive on Microsoft Teams. I know that might sound odd at first, but stay tuned. There's some really interesting and exciting things coming to this really collaboration hub of Microsoft for both now and in the future. So again, as we're having conversations, whether I'm speaking with someone who is actively engaged with us, or they're just someone who has some questions, which that's totally okay too. These are some of the most common ones that we have seen is, where should I save my file, right? Do I put it in OneDrive? Do I put it in SharePoint? Do I need to put it on all three? What is that? Office 365, it contains many apps. There's multiple ways to do the same task. But that's really what we see is some of these questions, right? Should I work on my documents directly within Teams or access them in SharePoint? When should I use SharePoint team or communication sites versus Microsoft Teams, right? How do I communicate with my team most effectively? Can I copy or move a file from Teams to SharePoint? Can I share my file with an external user from Teams? OneDrive for business versus SharePoint team site. Which one do I use? Which one is best? For my project work, should I use SharePoint team sites or Microsoft Teams? And we actually work with a lot of clients who have project-based businesses. And so we've come across this question very often. While creating a Teams, a team unit within Microsoft Teams, can I use existing SharePoint sites to avoid creating a new one, right? So with so much buzz around the collaboration in Office 365, it's easy to see how it could quickly become an issue for organization to understand which apps to use for what purposes, where should the documents be stored. And to be honest, there's really no one correct answer to these questions. There's an infinite amount of different ways you can structure your information across SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams to facilitate that collaboration. And for this reason, it can become quickly overwhelming because there's no real cookie cutter approach. And so it's entirely dependent on your circumstance and what it is that you're actually working on. But this can also be a huge advantage. So why is this important for you? When you work with a technology partner like ourselves, we not only take the time to understand the technology, but we take the time to understand how your business works as a whole, that the solution is now customized, it's flexible for the future, and easy to learn for your people because we're not disrupting what the thought process they have around your business is. So those are the questions we're going to dive into. Here's kind of a 10,000 foot overview. We want to kind of simplify it a little bit first. So OneDrive, think of that as accessing your files on any device that connects to the internet and then allowing you to download them offline. More of a working with your files type scenario. Teams, exactly what it sounds like, right? You're working with your team. SharePoint, that is really kind of in the background, and we'll dive deeper into this, but it's an intelligent intranet site. So it's meant for collaboration across the entire organization, okay? So first, OneDrive. So it's really the Files app for Microsoft 365. So it provides access to all files throughout content collaboration, allowing you to view information, co-author, share files, really on any device, again, which is powerful, especially for those Mac users who might be on here. Work together with anyone in real time, organize and find files that matter most. So all files are backed up, they're secured, they're protected, there's enterprise level security backing this, and then it's also compliant and easy to manage. So it's really where you can work with all your files, your individual work files, and anything shared across Office 365 on any device. That's what OneDrive is, okay? Teams is a hub where you and your team can collaborate on files. You can communicate, you can streamline processes. You can even share reports and analytics for specific topics. right? And this is extremely powerful for those meetings that we've all had in teams when we get together and we're talking about where things were, where things are going, or where we at today. Imagine being able to have this great visual embedded right into this conversation so that people can easily look over and see what the numbers are and what's important for this call. So obviously chat calls and meetings, you're on one right now. I think those are the obvious things. And then SharePoint, so behind the scenes, it's really providing intelligent services for all your files in Office 365, including anything you've shared within Teams, Yammer for those of you who are using Yammer, Outlook. SharePoint's always there. It's helping manage, protect your files, powers the collaboration, and really beyond files. SharePoint enables portals, news feeds, pages, lists, and platforms for business applications. It's the intelligent internet. It empowers sites to communicate broadly. You can manage content across the entire organization securely, though, right? Safely, securely, and remotely. Very, very important in this day and age. Okay, so you can work seamlessly across applications and devices. As we move into the future, AI or artificial intelligence is going to start playing a much bigger role. But as it sits now, you can work across all of these different platforms to provide really powerful file experiences where things are not locked, things are shared, they're secured, protected by industry-leading security and compliance. And that's really the 10,000-foot overview. It is simple, yet powerful way to understand how all of these work together. So let's dive a little bit deeper, right? So as I mentioned before, Teams is really your centralized collaborative hub. And this is where you're going to integrate with other Office 365 apps, such as OneDrive and SharePoint, to discuss and co-author those types of files. But when we're diving deeper into this, not only does it store chat files, so whether it's one-to-one or one-to-many, it also ensures that it restricts access to only users that have permission to view it for that intended user only. So you'll be able to go back into conversations in the past. You'll be able to pull that information out of OneDrive that's being stored from those chat files. But more specifically, I want to talk about a very relevant example, forecasting costs and revenues, right? This is happening everywhere right now. The economy is shifting. And so you can actually go in here, you can create a Teams group, associate them with your different business units. And the reason I'm talking about this, it's top of mind, is a scenario that we had ran into. And what they were wanting to do is have these business units broken out and then share out those collaborative files to ensure really that everyone has access to all of the important documents. So whether it's a report or last year's assumptions or this year's assumptions, and when everyone has access to that information, now you can collaborate and create new assumptions or revise existing ones. There's just so much control here. Many organizations in this specific example still handle this process manually. They don't know they own technology that can assist and help guide that process, whether it be approvals, document sharing, what have you. And so they can only have one person accessing a document at a time. They're left spending minutes, really to hours a day. You're manually managing a workflow that could be easily set up with just a little bit of guidance. On average, even just during the budgeting season, you could easily save 3 to 4 hours a week per person. That's a ton of time that could be spent on other things right now. And the kicker is, again, you most likely already own this. You just need a little help in making it work for you instead of the other way around, right? Next, use cases, right? So what is Teams great for? We've kind of covered this, but project-oriented, working together in files, calls, being able to meet right where the work is happening. That's the real power of using Teams. So SharePoint, team, group, or organization, right? But this is just simply storing files in the cloud and allowing you to manage their permissions and create content-rich Teams channels as needed. So you can pull that down. OneDrive, again, this is more of where I'm working on my desktop or laptop, but I still want to be able to share it out to the team. And then you can store and sync files on anywhere on any device. So ideal for those working remotely or travel quite a bit. I'm not going to go through this whole slide. Good news is we will be sending out this slide deck. So for everyone in attendance, you will receive this, but I do want to kind of dive into another example, another very relevant example. So let's say you're working on creating a blog or a piece of marketing content that you want to share out to the world, right? So obviously more than just the one person writing the content is going to be involved. So step one, right? We have a Teams call. We discuss the topic is decided on, and then we have roles assigned. The next step is the initial blog writer or content creator. They're going to create that file and then going to share it, save it into OneDrive. Now the documents can be shared to Teams, and if you wanted to, you could have a group call and add additional inputs or insights. Let's say maybe there was a case study or a magazine article or something that was done in the past that's in SharePoint that someone who's been there longer knows and says, hey, it would be great if you could reference this and integrate it into your content. So now that user, that content creator can now go into SharePoint, pull it down into OneDrive based after that team call, finalize the content, and once it's finalized, now it can be sent for approval. The document that is originally created is now on SharePoint to be shared back to the stakeholders for approval and additional feedback, right? So why is this important for you? Nobody manually managed emails. There was a single source of truth the entire time. The file was always secure internally. Anyone could access this at any time. It was documented who made changes and when. Only people who were given access to the document could see it, and stakeholders were not bothered with tasks until final approval was needed, right? And so it's a very relevant example, especially for those who are familiar with marketing and in general, how that would go to share anything out publicly for that matter. So with that being said, we're going to dive into Teams a little bit because Teams is really, this is the hub for teamwork that enables productivity, gives them a single kind of secure location that brings everything together that a team needs. So first is communication. So obviously there's always going to be a diverse workplace no matter where you are. Some people are working in an office, some are going to always be out in the field. Others may be traveling often, but since the beginning of Teams, it's evolved to be much more than just chatting. We have voice, we have video. You can use them for informal one-on-ones. And I think this is the most obvious thing that Teams does. But again, it wasn't always like this. You can even now dial in from your phone into a meeting. So if you are on the road, you can still be a part of these conversations, and it really bridges those geographical barriers that we're seeing just not only now with what's going on in the world, but just in general. So the next is collaboration, and so there's a multi-generational workforce out there. You have people who have been in business or in finance for years and years and years, and they know what they know, right? You know, you're going to pry Excel from my cold dead hands. I've heard people say before, and they love them, right? So whether it's PowerPoint, like I'm using PowerPoint, OneNote, SharePoint, even Power BI, you can use all of those right within the context of Teams. And so now instead, if you're creating a file or a document and going back and forth on email, like I had talked about before, and having to go back, wait, which version's the right version? What was version 2 and what was version 3 and what email was that? Now it can all be brought together into one place and easily share and co-author files without the need for email attachments, right? And so that's really an extremely powerful concept. Customization. So when I had talked about the multi-generational workforce, you also have the coming on class, right? They're very tech savvy. They very much want to be on the cutting edge. It's important to them when they're looking at companies to work for. They want the ability to be creative, to have access to the latest and greatest, and Teams allows that. So it's a very extendable platform. Not only can you create your own app within here, you can look at apps that have been created already. There's over 150 partners that are in here. Things for those of you familiar with something like maybe a GitHub or a Trello, those are in there. But also being able to create maybe something from scratch. So this enables you to build apps and integrate with your business processes specifically. And so for those of you who are not familiar with apps or the concept of apps, it's really centered around business process and business productivity. If you have questions about that, feel free to reach out. We can chat. And then the last piece I've been talking about on and off, but it's very, very important, is the enterprise level grade security. And there's lots of industries we've worked with in the past: healthcare, nonprofit, financial firms. There's compliance, credit unions. There's always going to be a specific type of compliance that's there. And so having that enterprise level security and being able to expect that is a huge value add to these applications. And Teams is really the future. And so as we move into the future, again, lots of partners that we're able to connect to. You see a few on here I mentioned already. But even for those of you who are using something like a WebEx, if you have a YouTube channel, Google Analytics is huge. Power BI can plug into Google Analytics as well. There's just so much out there in terms of availability for productivity that it's going to be a really exciting time for those who choose to invest in learning this. You will gain competitive edge. You will hire sharper and more skilled and qualified folks as you continue to invest in learning this stuff, and to pay huge dividends. So we've been talking quite a bit about Teams as a platform. So here are your productivity apps kind of on the top, and a lot you're familiar with: Word, PowerPoint, OneNote, Excel. And in the middle, right in the middle, there's a very important piece. We've titled it Low Code Dev and Automation. Think of this as, how do I get from point A? So if we just take an example of any project, maybe you're an engineer, and there's a process for approval for changing how a product is made, right? A lot of times organizations handle that manually, or the budgeting example that I'd used earlier. A lot of organizations handle that manually. Well, when you're using some of this automation type technology, not only can you create what's called a flow, so a flow could have layers of approval or specific checkpoints that you have to check off as you work through the process, but you can even visualize it. So something like a Power BI, you can plug into that process. You can see the average amount of time that it takes to change how a product's developed. There's just so much there that's available within this section, and so we're going to dive deeper into that next. But it's all centered around the bottom. How do I provide my departments and business units more effective tools? How do I make my employees more resourceful? How do I track and process? Really, how do I track what's happening behind the scenes? And then obviously support. So if there's questions from any of these, how am I answering those? Am I answering them quickly? Is it tracked? Is it communicated? And this really results in happy employees, happy customers, and happy stakeholders, which is really important. So yeah, I had talked about all that. Quickly on the front end, when we talk about interface, this is what you see. This is what your users see. So they'll see things like tabs or bots. We actually are partnered with a organization where you can actually go directly into Teams. You can ask Teams a question and it will search for all of the relevant information. The reason we can do that is because everything's interconnected, right? So whether it's been a file that's been emailed, it's something in Yammer, it's a project you're working on, all of this integration in the back end is supporting what your users are seeing in the quote interface or front end. So they see notifications, extensions, actions, all in the background. We're using things like Flow or SharePoint to manage the information so they can spend more time on handling the message action, so they can dive into a task and make the business more productive. Excuse me. So PowerApps, I've talked quite a bit about this already. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but just know this is where you can share the apps you can created and also create your own, and then connect to a myriad of different services, SharePoint lists. There's 300 plus on there. So just know this is really a powerful way to have low-code apps for PC and mobile. Next is Power BI. Obviously, everyone knows the value of reporting. Power BI is a world-class data visualization tool. It enables you to embed visuals, whether it's in Teams or on a website. You can integrate to really any database that you're working with, even something like an Excel or a CSV file that's listed here. But this is the power of visualization, is being able to have on one section all of the most important numbers for a team or for a company right at your fingertips. So Power BI, we actually do lots and lots of work and training around Power BI. It's one of our gold expertise. Automate routines with Power Automate. This is what I had mentioned before. So if you're needing approvals or you're wanting to automate existing processes, this is a very powerful way to make that a reality. Is you can connect to 300 plus cloud or on-premise data services. There's pre-built templates, so approvals, alerts, data collection, reminders. Obviously, there's always going to be an advanced scenario where things maybe need to have multiple steps or multiple approvals. There's room for all of that. As I mentioned before, a common scenario is a business looking at a specific thing like Power Automate, thinking about what it can do, and then choosing, excuse me, how to use it. The real power comes in is when you start from the ground up. You go back to what is the customer experience, what's the vendor experience, what's the employee experience, and then build from that. Is we have processes, we have flows, we have things that we're already doing. How do I get the technology I already own to work for my business? And that's what we do best at Advaiya. So last thing here, Microsoft Forms. You may have seen this. We sent it out. We were hoping to get some questions to be answered ahead of time. But what's really neat about this is it can be used both internally or externally. So it can be used internally or externally. It can even solve sophisticated questions. So if you share that within a team's a project or something like that, people can actually use these forms to provide feedback. And then you have the fun stuff like we sent out, polls, quizzes, surveys, things of that nature. So that's the last thing I want to touch on. Again, my name is Michael. We are Advaiya. Digital transformation, it's meant to be a tailored experience. So it's tailored to an organization, its specific needs. It involves planning, road mapping, implementing the right technologies and data infrastructures, using data for insights, and ultimately using the power of technology for foresight and intelligent automation. Our services cover the entire journey. And so if you have questions about what you've seen today, where you're at, where you're going, just know certified Microsoft Gold Partner, and I'm more than happy to help with that. So hopefully today you were able to learn about how these three very popular business apps work together. I'm going to pause. I think I had seen a couple of questions, but thank you so much for being here. Let me pull this up. But yeah, if I don't get to your question, we had come up on time, so I wanted to take time to at least answer a few of these. Let's see. Okay. Again, if we don't get to your question, definitely feel free to reach out to us, but we will be reaching out to you if we don't get to your question. Everyone's going to get the slide deck. I believe we're going to be sending out the recording as well, and there is a landing page on our website for this particular topic. So if you go onto our site, advaiya.com, you'll see a heading for this webinar. You could submit any and all questions or feedback there. So question one is there an option where the team leader gets notified whenever a file is opened by a specific user or edited? So on the Microsoft portal, there's a specific site available where you'll have to log in as the admin, but then you get a complete audit trail of your files within the organization as well as outside the organization. So you can find out when and who made the changes, and you can also find out what users have what kind of access and permissions. So what level of security they have. That's a good question. Yeah, feel free to ask. I may not be seeing them all. I don't know if my connection is strong, but again, if we don't get to them, we'll definitely get back to you. Question two, how to integrate and sync SharePoint and OneDrive. So actually, if you open the SharePoint site, there's a sync button available at the top of the ribbon of the documents library. So you can use that. Basically, it is a new OneDrive sync app. It allows you to sync your SharePoint document library into OneDrive. So when you click on it, it automatically opens your OneDrive client on your desktop. If one client is not installed for one reason or another on your desktop, then it's going to ask you if you want to download it, and then only after that we'll start syncing. But that's how that would work. Let's see here. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions. So with that, I will again say thank you so much for attending. I hope you got something out of today. And again, feel free to shoot us a call, an email. We would love to serve you in any way, answer any questions you might have. And again, thanks so much for attending.